Hey, Engage Albany. This Sunday we're going to look at maybe, perhaps I might say, one of the most easily misunderstood as well as likely most controversial passages in the New Testament. And I wanted to just put a little bit of a teaser video about it, just because I don't know if we'll be able to unpack all of it. Although the bulk of what we'll do on Sunday. But I wanted to put out a little video, and maybe I'll do more of these as time goes on about the text we're looking at on Sunday. And just a quick disclaimer: this is really meant for people at Engage Albany. So if you're not a part of a church or not local to Albany, I would encourage you to be a part of a church and not make this your primary way of growing as a disciple of Christ. But that said, I am putting this on the internet, so if it would supplement your walk, by all means, have at it. But this is really for the context here is for people in our own local church. So let me do this. Let me the question. I'll say it like this is a question: Are women called to ministry? And I'll give a definitive answer, which is absolutely yes, but not to pastoral ministry. Okay, we'll talk that through here, but let me now read the text here, and then we'll just briefly kind of unpack it a little bit. I'm just going to do two verses. We'll do more on this coming Sunday. 1 Timothy 2 verses 11 through 12 says this, and this is the CSB translation, which I think is actually one of the better ones. It handles this well. A woman is to learn quietly with full submission. I do not allow a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. Instead, she is to remain quiet. This is the word of the Lord here. And just two passages, and they're very prone to some misunderstanding. So first, let me say this. The CSB, I like how they translate this. We're not translation snobs here. We don't think there's one exclusive English translation, but it uses the word, it translates the word quiet. Some other translations have maybe too loosely translated the word silent, and that could be a little deceiving. But let's just look at this before we get too offended by the initial statement, which is possible. In some sense, you could say these verses are applicable to all people, whether man or woman. So the idea, right, of remaining quiet here. Now they're talking about the local church gathering. There's something going on in the church that Timothy pastors, and the older pastor Paul is writing to him to say, address the situation. There's something going on with some women in that church that he's saying, let them remain quiet. But we could say that would apply to all people in a church gathering, right? Because you can't actually learn if you're not being quiet, right? You can't hear what's being spoken by those who are leading the worship service, the church gathered on a Sunday, if you're not quiet, right? So the idea is not that women are not allowed to speak in church. It's just that while the teaching is happening, they should be quiet, as should everybody in the church. So there was something going on in the church. We only see one side of this. We don't see what Timothy had shared with Paul, but there was something going on with some women who were being distracting. They were creating some sort of distraction during the church service, and Paul is saying, let them be quiet. Now, the other thing in here is, we need to be clear about this, is that the Bible is actually countercultural in all times and all places. It was then, it is now, and for maybe in different ways. Maybe their culture had swung a little too far the other way, and ours has swung a little too far in a different direction. The fact that Paul says, let a woman learn quietly with full submission, is actually pretty radical for that time, because many folks in the Jewish religion of that time would say women shouldn't actually learn at all, that they were inferior beings who should not learn. Tragically, they said that about women during that time. And we have, from the example of Jesus, right? You think of him with Mary and Martha. He says, she has chosen the better portion to sit at my feet to learn. He viewed them as equal to men, capable of learning, right, as image bearers of God. He wanted them to learn. He wanted them to be disciples. And so he says here, Paul does, let a woman learn. They should learn, and let them do so with full submission. Now, who is the submission to? Well, it's ultimately to Christ. So it's to the pastors of that local church that Timothy is pastoring. They should be in submission to them spiritually. But and it could seem a little strong, but can you really be a disciple of somebody if you're not in submission to them? Can you really be Jesus' disciple and only be half submitted to him, right? So we would say the same thing about men as well, that they should be in full submission to Christ under the authority of the church as well. So then we have the last piece, which is I do not allow a woman to teach or to have authority over man. Now we'll get to 1 Timothy 3 in coming weeks, and that's where we see the qualifications for pastors in the church. And one of them is that they should be males. Now we have to be clear, though, being a male does not qualify you to be a pastor. There's actually other things. There's character qualifications. So we would come down and say men are called to be pastors. A pastor of a church has to be a male. However, not just any male. Most males are not actually up to the requirements of what Scripture would say a pastor should be. Now, you should aspire to that if you are in the church, but we're going to say that men should be pastors in the church. But women can do so many other things. We're so grateful that God has given us complementary men and women in the church, and we would not say that women have to be quiet. They can actually teach, believe it or not, just not in that Sunday authoritative position of the pastor. Okay, and here's where I just want to kind of maybe end is Colossians 3:16 says this: "Let the word of Christ dwell richly among you." He's talking to the church here. "In all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another through psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts." Notice it says, teaching and admonishing one another. He's talking to the church. He expects that women would also teach men, right? But where it really, there's one area where that would not happen, and that is in the office, the teaching office of a pastor or elder. We use those terms synonymously as the New Testament does. And so we celebrate that women have, many women are able to teach others. We would put one small limitation on that to say that women are not to teach as pastors, right? So we want to celebrate all of the things that women add to church. Talking to people who likely more than half maybe that watch this will be women. We're so grateful for you, and we want you to teach, but within the parameters that the scriptures have laid out. And then the very, very last thing I will say is that some people have just come to really silly conclusions, like it's a sin to learn from a woman, which is ridiculous. And I would even argue, if you're a married man, you're just by the proximity of the relationship to having a wife, you're going to learn more from her than you will from anyone else, including your pastors. And so embrace that. Don't come to these ridiculous, unhuman positions where you think you can't learn from somebody because they're not a male. Being a male does not make you qualified to be a pastor, meaning the characteristics in your character, in your personhood that are outlined in 1 Timothy 3 is what qualifies somebody to be a pastor. Okay, so we celebrate the diversity that God has given us with two genders, with male and with female. All right, thanks for watching this. There's more to come. Peace.